the whole nuclear power debate by providing the loan guarantees that would allow for new plants to be built for the first time in more than 30 years. Helen Caldicott, are you concerned about this?
Oh, Amy, the whole thing's nuclear madness, which is what I called my first book that I wrote in 1978. A new report from the New York Academy of Sciences has just translated 5,000 papers from Russian into English. It's the most devastating report I've ever seen. Up to 1 million people have already died from Chernobyl, and people will continue to die from cancer for virtually the rest of time. What we should know is that 1/1,000,000 of a gram of plutonium or less can induce cancer, or will induce cancer. Each reactor has 250 kilos or 500 pounds of plutonium in it. There's enough plutonium in these reactors to kill everyone on Earth. Now, what George doesn't understand, and that, George, I really appreciate your writing, and I understand your concern about global warming. You don't understand internal emitters. I was commissioned to write an article for the New England Journal of Medicine about the dangers of nuclear power. I spent a year researching it. You've bought the propaganda from the nuclear industry. They say it's low-level radiation. That's absolute rubbish. If you inhale a millionth of a gram of plutonium, the surrounding cells receive a very, very high dose. Most die within that area because it's an alpha emitter. The cells on the periphery remain viable. They mutate and their regulatory genes are damaged. Years later, that person develops cancer. Now, that's true for radioactive iodine that goes to the thyroid, cesium-137 that goes to the brain and muscles, strontium-90 goes to bone, causing bone cancer and leukemia. It's imperative, George, because you're highly intelligent and a very important commentator, that you understand internal emitters and radiation, and it's not low level to the cells that are exposed. Radiobiology is imperative to understand these days. I do suggest, humbly, that if you read my book, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer, which I think I've tried to send you once, you'll learn about that. And I totally agree, global warming is a terrible, terrible catastrophe. However, I commissioned a study done by Arjun Makajani from IEER about 3-4 years ago called Carbon-Free, Nuclear-Free. The truth is, George, that there's enough renewable technology now, right now, which is relatively cheap, to supply the whole of the US's needs by 2040 without any carbon and any nuclear. We just need to have the politicians to get out of the pockets of the nuclear companies, the coal companies, the oil companies, and start funding renewable energy. Why isn't there a solar panel on every single house in America? Solar hot water systems, windmills everywhere. You know, it would increase the GDP and employ hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world. This is the way to go. That's the prescription for survival. Nuclear power, George, creates massive quantities of radioactive waste. There's nowhere to put it on Earth that's safe. As it leaks into the water over time, it will bioconcentrate in the food chains, in the breast milk, in the fetuses that are thousands of times more radiosensitive than adults. 1x rate of the pregnant abdomen doubles the incidence of leukemia in the child. And over time, nuclear waste will induce epidemics of cancer, leukemia and genetic disease and random compulsory genetic engineering. And we're not the only species with genes, of course, it's plants and animals. So this is an absolute catastrophe, the likes of which the world has never seen before.
Let's get George Monbiot's response.
Yes, well, thank you, Helen, and thank you for all the work you've done over the years, which I think has made a fantastic contribution. But what you were saying about the impacts of radiation does not seem to square with the observed cancer rates amongst populations who have been exposed to higher levels of radiation.
George, it's not right. You need to read the literature.
Well, I have been reading the literature. I have been reading the literature, and there's a very extensive
The medical literature? Have you read the New York Academy of Sciences report?
I haven't read the whole report. I've read part of it. But can I just say that
you must read the whole report.
You know, sorry, Helen, would you please let me finish what I'm trying to say?
Sorry, George.
When I've been dealing with climate change over the past 20 years or so, I learned very quickly that you have to effectively go with the scientific consensus rather than with a few outlier papers, because to choose those outlier papers over the scientific consensus is effectively to cherry pick or to data mine and to get what turns out to be a misleading view. That's certainly been my experience with climate change. Now, when it comes to radiation, I think we're in danger possibly of falling into a similar trap to the trap that climate change deniers have fallen into with their cherry picking of the science there. For instance, I don't think you could dismiss the UN Scientific Committee as being part of the nuclear industry. I don't think you can dismiss the very large amount of data on the... Sorry, you're saying you would dismiss the UN Scientific Committee as being part of the nuclear industry?
Yes, let me tell you, George, that the International Atomic Energy Agency...
No, the UN Scientific Committee is what I'm talking about. But, I mean, if that is the case, then it worries me, the UN Scientific Committee on Atomic Radiation, it worries me if you really do lump them in there, that we're getting into the same sort of conspiratorial thinking that you have with climate change denial, whereby anyone who doesn't go along with the line of the climate change deniers that carbon dioxide is not connected with climate change, for example, is in the hands of the carbon trading industry or something like that. Now, you know, there is a very large body of evidence from Chernobyl, from many other nuclear incidents, from people's exposure to elevated levels of background radiation, whether it's radon gas coming from granite masses, whether it's higher solar radiation because of where they live, and what we do not see is that clear relationship between those lower levels of radiation that you predict and the incidence of cancers, let alone the higher incidence of death. It's just, it's only there in very particular cases, generally with extremely high exposures of radiation, or in specific cases like, for instance, the combination of radon exposure and smoking, which raises the incidence of lung cancer among smokers from 10% to 16%, but the radon exposure seems to have almost no impact on the level of cancers among the rest of the population. So I just think, you know, we've got to be very, very careful about which science we trust and which we do not.
Helen Caldicott.
George, you must listen to me. I'm a paediatrician. I'm a physician, highly trained. I was on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. My specialty is cystic fibrosis, the most common genetic disease of childhood. I actually, and I'm not boasting, but I'm a very good doctor. You know, I came second in my year of medicine. I don't say things that are inaccurate, otherwise I would be deregistered. I mean, doctors can't lie. George, there's a huge literature on internal emitters and radiation. The New York Academy of Science, this report on Chernobyl is absolutely devastating, but there are now 2,600 genetic diseases described. I first learned about radiation by learning about the experiments with Drosophila fruit fly by Muller when I did first-year medicine in '56. You can produce a gene for a crooked wing that's passed on generation to generation. We will not live to see the abnormalities created by radiation from our activities now, because, you know, we'll all be dead by the time we have 20 or more generations. But it's imperative that people understand that internal emitters cause cancer, but the incubation time for cancer is any time from 2 to 60 years. George, the International Atomic Energy Agency has an unholy alliance with the WHO, World Health Organization, which says WHO cannot examine any accident related to nuclear power, etc., without the permission of the IAEA. And indeed, it didn't examine Chernobyl. 40% of the European landmass is still radioactive, George. Turkish food is extremely radioactive. And we have to wait to see the cancers arising and do epidemiological studies, many of which have been done to expose populations. George, there's no debate about this. There's no debate. I speak to doctors all the time in medical schools, in hospitals, grand rounds. We all understand this. There is no debate in the medical community.
Let me ask George Monbiot. Let me ask George Monbiot. The 25th anniversary of Chernobyl is 3 weeks away. Scientists have documented extreme levels of radiation still there, miles and miles of dead trees, mutated birds, insects, leukemia deaths of children. Is this your understanding?
Oh, miles and miles of dead trees. I don't believe that that's an effect of Chernobyl. It might well be an effect of acid rain in the area, but I haven't seen any scientific evidence suggesting miles and miles of dead trees caused by the Chernobyl erosion or of widespread impacts amongst wildlife. Now, as for the leukemia incidence, yes, unquestionably, well, thyroid cancer actually was the big one amongst children. There was some elevated incidence of leukemia amongst particularly a few of the workers at Chernobyl, but the broader impact was of thyroid cancer, and that could have been massively reduced, that incidence, A, by giving iodine pills to children, and B, by forbidding them for a period of time from drinking the contaminated milk, because the authorities were so appallingly lax and didn't do any of either of those basic precautions. We see a much higher rate of thyroid cancer amongst children than there ever should have been. Now, on these questions that Helen raises, I mean, if she's honestly saying that the World Health Organization is now part of the conspiracy and the cover-up as well, then the mind boggles. You know, where does this end?
The mind does boggle.
Them and the UN Scientific Committee and the IAEA, and I mean, who else is involved in this conspiracy? We need to know.
Finally, Helen Caldicott.
Yes, we do. It's the IAEA which promotes nuclear power. Oh, sorry, Amy. It's the IAEA that promotes nuclear power, right, but says you mustn't build bombs from your reactor. And that negotiation took place, several decades, quite a lot of decades ago. And the WHO just does not, it has not examined the results. Yes, this is the biggest medical conspiracy and cover-up in the history of medicine, George. Yes.
So the WHO, IAEA, the UN Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation.
I don't know about the UN
Scientific
Committee.
Well, that's
certainly
you
the
don't know about it. I mean,
and the WHO.
The UN Scientific Committee is the major repository of the science on this issue. You don't know about it?
Well, yeah, no, I've read about it, but the main thing is that the WHO was prevented or did not examine the results from Chernobyl, and it's ongoing and will be for generations and generations, George.
But the United Nations did.
40% of the soil in Europe is contaminated.
The United Nations Committee did examine Chernobyl, and they said that so far the death toll from Chernobyl amongst both workers and local people is 43. Sorry, are you saying you didn't know that they'd examined this and you aren't aware of their report?
That's a lie.
What's a lie?
How dare,
yes, I am.
How dare they say that?
On that,
how dare they say that? This is a total cover-up.
We're going to wrap with 10 seconds of
each.
In this wake of what has happened in Japan and on this anniversary of Chernobyl 3 weeks away, I give you each 15 seconds to express your concern as we wrap up this debate, beginning with George Monbiot.
Well, we have to use the best available science, not cherry-pick our sources, and we have to keep some perspective on this so that we don't see a massive rush to coal as governments get out of nuclear as a result of what's happened in Japan.
And Helen Caldicott, 15 seconds.
George, I totally agree with you about coal. I think it's a deadly substance and we must stop burning a la James Hansen. But we must not go from the global warming frying pan into the nuclear fire, George. This is an obscene technology. They've known about it since the Manhattan Project. Seaborg, who discovered plutonium, said it's the most dangerous substance on Earth. Each reactor has 500 pounds of plutonium lasts for 500,000 years, causing cancer after cancer.